Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to draw Link, one of my students who volunteered. We're going to begin with the cranium, like we always do. And I'm going to indicate on the photograph the form of the cranium. This is what we're sort of drawing. And it's really important that you learn to associate the bottom of the cranium with the bottom of the nose. And it's fairly level with the bottom of the ear as well. And the form that I've taught you to draw is 2 half circles with a space in between them, and near the bottom of that space is the ear hole. So this is how we're starting out. And if you're still having trouble drawing a half circle, remember to check that the radius is the same going this way and going this way. So just as if we've learned, the brow ridge is just below the center point of the cranium here. The line of the face comes straight down from the brow ridge. We're going to build the face around that line. And I'm going to make that line longer than it needs to be to start. And then I'm going to measure it down. So we're going to go from the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose. And we're going to check. That should be about the same as the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. If you want to measure that yourself, I think you're going to find they are exactly the same. So that's one of the most important proportions we've learned. We go from the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose, and we double it, and that gets us to the bottom of the chin. And that's so important to get right. Most of you are still making the bottom part of the face too long. And if you would just check this measurement every time, you'll avoid that error. Also, very important, the bottom of the nose lines up with the bottom of the cranium. We know where the ear hole is, and so we can see that the jaw comes up behind, just in front of the ear hole. That the ear hole hinges is right behind the hinge of the jaw. So the jawline sort of follows this shadow edge like this. The neck, front of the neck just tilts forward a little bit, and it's sort of located under the angle of the jaw, so we can mark that location now. And the throat angles down at about the same number of degrees that the jaw angles up. So this is an isosceles triangle that's formed by these 2 angles. They're the same. The angle of the collar is a little steeper than the angle of the jaw, so we compare, make sure this is a little steeper than this. And that's our basic block in. Most of you are going to want to put the hoodie, the hood of the hoodie way too low, because people want it to be, they want to put it way down here. Notice that this line here, if I extend it, it's going to bring us slightly higher than the angle of the jaw. So we can get it correctly if we just go straight across like that. Okay. Are we caught up, everybody, or we need a minute? Okay, resuming the drawing. Now we're going to go from, let me clean up these annotations. Okay, so we're looking for, first of all, notice that the brow ridge just flows right up into the forehead. It's not really a bump. And the forehead is very steep, goes like straight up, and then it curves back to the hairline. If you recall, the distance from the brow to the hairline is usually about the same as the brow to the nose. Although the hairline placement is highly variable. If you look at me, for example, my hairline is quite high because my hair is receding. Yeah. So you see, but on Link, this distance actually a little shorter than this distance because Link's hairline is a little low. So that's a very highly varies on everybody. Okay. So under the brow ridge, we have this scooped out indentation. And then we're going to draw the nose. Now we marked where the bottom of the nose is, but the bottom of the nose here is not horizontal. It slopes up a little bit. So let's just indicate that slope. I can also drop this line back in, and you can see that if we put a line of the face out where the brow ridge is, at the back of the nose is just in front of that line, back of the ala, and that the nose then slopes up a little, and the tip of the nose is fairly large radius circle, maybe about like that. And the nose makes one slight directional change. See, it's a little steeper to about here, and then it gets a little shallower and heads towards the indent. Okay, remember the eye level should be about centered on the face. We can check that. And by centered, I mean from the top of the skull to eye level is about the same as the eye level to the bottom of the chin, which it is. So, and we also know the eye level tends to be right under the indentation. So eye level should be about here. The eye here is not too far set back. Let's think about this in a new way. Let's look at this angle and this angle. And you see how these are about the same? If we go from the back of the eye to the back of the ala, it's about the same angle as the slope of the nose. And that sort of helps us locate where the back corner of the eye might be. And then we're going to zoom in a little, and we can see that the eye here is a very symmetrical triangle. The upper lid, as always, as it has to, sticks out further than the eye itself, because the lid is made of skin, and skin has thickness. So don't forget that. And the iris is very foreshortened, and the lower lid angles down at about the same angle that the upper lid angles up. So we end up with something like this. Now, one thing I want to teach you to always measure is this distance. Here's the bottom of the eye socket, which we can see is a very slight plane change. And here's the top of the ala, which is another slight plane change. And I like to always measure this distance in between. You see that? It's much shorter than most beginners draw it. So we're going to lightly indicate these plane changes, and we're going to focus on bringing these two forms really close to each other. If you check most beginner drawings, it's just like way too much space in here. I can see that the radius of my nose is a little small. I got to make that, I should have made that circle at the tip a little bit larger. And before I assess the nose, I want to make sure to put the nostril in. The nostril is this little teardrop shape that's basically centered on this nose front to back. Do a little shading for the eyebrow. Notice how the eyebrow follows the line of the brow ridge up here. And here is the line of the cheek right behind the ala. Just a slight fullness right there. That's this one. Okay, I'm going to put that line of the face back in as a reference. So we went from the brow ridge straight down. That hits the back of the ala. And notice that the philtrum is a little closer to the back of the ala than it is to the tip of the nose. So it's not quite centered. It's a little bit off center. It kind of lines up with the back of this nostril. So mark where the philtrum starts, right there. And then its angle, if we block it in without worrying about the curve, the angle is about maybe 20 degrees from vertical, like that. And here we could triangulate a little bit. You see, we need to find this plane change here. Notice that the philtrum is about a third shorter than the length of the nose from the philtrum to the tip. You see that? So if we know this distance, we know this should be about a third shorter. So it's about like this. And if you want, you can even sketch that triangle to make sure the shape is about right. So let's check one more proportion here. Remember, the line between the lips is expected to be 1/3 of the way down from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to say that the mouth here is just a little higher than that. So a little less than a third of the way down for the line between the lips. So we're going to leave a little extra space underneath. The line between the lips angles down at about 45 degrees and stops just short of the line of the face. Sort of like that, maybe a little steeper. And the curve of the bottom lip is pretty full. It covers about more than a quarter of this distance from here to here. So we know where this is. We're going to go a little more than a quarter of the way down to get to the bottom of that curve. Now we can really clearly see in this photograph one of the really confusing things about mouths, which is that that the plane change of the lips does not correspond perfectly to the color change. See, here's where the color change is. This is where the lips are red. This is the plane change. So always be aware that these two features do not line up. The plane change is indicated with shadow. We don't worry too much about the color change. All right. I'm going to put the line of the face back in. And I'm also going to put the facial angle in. So the facial angle is going to help us with, see how the facial angle almost touches the bottom lip? And if we draw that in, that tells us how far back to put the chin. So we've got this little straight part, and then we've got the curve of the chin right here.
It's not looking like you. It's looking okay, but it doesn't look like you.
Okay, zooming out again. So we're going to go, basically, we already blocked this in. We're just going to make this a very slight curve, but it's pretty much straight back to here. And we've got a little fold at the base of the neck and a little fullness for the front of the neck there. Okay, we're now going to do a close study of Link's ear. We can see that the bottom of the ear is a little lower than the bottom of the nose. See, if we pull it horizontal here, top of the ear is level with the top of the eye. So top of the ear is going to be here, bottom of the ear is going to be about here. Yep. So the ear lobe, we know where the ear hole is. Notice that the ear lobe is sort of centered under the ear hole. And then we're going to block this form in. This angle is just very steep. And then we're going to turn into a curve on top. If we imagine the ear hole is here, the front of this curve is right above the ear hole. So this curve should end at a point above where the ear hole is, like that. So that's our block in of the form. Let's find the center of this form. If we measure from the top of the form, the bottom of the form, notice that the ear hole is pretty much in the middle. So the ear hole might be just a little higher than I have it. And the tragus is under the ear hole. So the tragus is right there, slightly under the center of the ear. The antitragus is opposite the tragus. And one of the most important things to get right is your starting point of your helix. So we're going to start the helix right here and then curve up and around. So this is a point that's above and to the left of the ear hole, near the center of the ear. We're going to curve up and around. And as we come down, we start to fade away. And it fades, but it remains this sort of slight crease that ends right under the antitragus. Then we go from the antitragus, we curve up, and we disappear behind the helix. And that's the step that people have the hardest time with. You got to get this overlap. And once you shade under it, and you shade a little bit around the ear hole, and up here in the triangular fossa, you have a very finished looking ear. Okay. We're going to back out now and block in the hair.
Can you come check our drawings first?
Yep.
Why do all my drawings so
Okay, we are now going to block in the hair. So, we know where the hairline is. We drew the forehead already. From here, we're going up, and the back of the cranium is a little higher than the front. That's a very typical thing we see. We're turning this corner, and then we're coming down with the braid like this. I'm going to show you how I would think about blocking in the hairline. I would turn this into a series of straight lines, because then I can measure the angles and the distances. It's very hard to measure angles and distances of curves. It's relatively easy to measure them when you translate them into straight lines. So now I can see that this angle and then this angle, this is straight up and down. This goes forward and ends right behind the eyebrow. This goes almost straight up. And then we curve around to the front of the hairline like that. You see how easy it is if you turn it into a bunch of straights instead of drawing all the curves you see. We can do the same thing back here. We've got straight like that. So we've got this. Okay, when I was your age, I would look at a braid like that and feel completely overwhelmed and be like, I don't want to draw that. That's way too hard. So we're going to figure out how to make this simple. Let's zoom in on that braid.
Let's make the world's best braid. So I'm freaking proud of this drawing. I want it confident. Oh yeah. Good. Doesn't look like Link, but it looks like some person. Yeah. That's pretty impressive.
Okay. So we're again looking for translation into simple geometric shapes. So this is, we can conceive of this as almost a parallelogram. And we can see where it sits in relation to the ear. It's pretty far back. It's sort of level with this part of the helix. And if we get the size a little wrong, it's okay. Because every time you braid your hair, it comes out a little different. It's not like your nose or your lips. Then under that, we can think of this as another geometric shape. And here I'm going to switch. I'm going to think of this as a curve. You see what I'm doing? I'm just trying to simplify something that's kind of complex and overwhelming into a series of simple geometric shapes. And that's always how you approach it. There's a curve here and a curve here. And don't worry that it doesn't look like hair yet. It will. Hair yet.
I need like, I think personal help with the hair.
When you're going so, it doesn't look like Link, but you're going really strong. So I think some reason. Yeah. Keep believing me.
It doesn't look like.
There's another circular form. And there's the bottom of the braid. Okay. Now we're going to take these forms we drew and we're going to shadow map them. So the shadow map on, I'm going to turn this into a slightly rounder form to make it look more natural. Same with this one. And then I'm going to shadow map them. So this shadow break is right along here. The shadow break here is along like that. This one is all in shadow. This one has a shadow break along here. This one shadow break is along here. And then we're going to do a first shading inside all of our shaded forms. We're going to leave the highlights for now. And remember, if you're right-handed, you're going to shade the other direction. So now we took these simple geometric forms and translated them into a pattern of light and dark. And now it's starting to look like something. This last form, I would say, has light in the middle and it has shading on both sides. Like that. And over to the right of the braid, between the braid and the ear, is some hair that's all in full shadow. So we can put that dark in there. And we're gonna zoom out again. And see what's happening up above this braid. I'm just gonna isolate a few shapes of light. And it doesn't matter if yours are in exactly the right position. Here we've got this kind of a shape going on. And we've got a row of highlights that are basically follow this kind of a contour. You see what I'm seeing here? And you just have to trust the process. It doesn't look like anything until you shade it, but having identified where the highlights are, I can now do first shading everywhere else in the hair. And that's the most important step for hair that most beginners just skip over completely, which is making up your mind where the hair's in light and where it's in shadow and doing that first shading. Because that's how you start to see the hair as a volume and not as just a collection of thin little strands of hair. If you draw it as a collection of strands, you're going to end up with a ugly doll's head. You think the forehead's too big? Might be. So, okay, I'm bringing the hairline down. I'll bring the hairline down a little.
I think it's a little wider as well. It kind of made it a little shorter.
Oh yeah, this comes a little close. Okay.
Yeah, that looks better.
So now our hair has its highlights and it has its midtones. And we can see it as a volume. And in order to finish the hair, all we need to do is add our dark accents. But we need to understand how those dark accents relate to the highlights and the midtones. So I'm going to throw in some dark accents along the shadow break here. And I'm pressing really quite hard now. And I'm exaggerating a little the reflected light on the other side of this braid, but I think it looks good that way, so I'm just going to leave it. And I'm just looking for where the darkest darks are, my dark accents. And I'm putting them in, and this is the first stage where I'm really making lines that follow the direction that individual hairs are growing. And that's important. Is you want to do that, but only at the very last step. Again, if you do that right from the start, it will look like a doll's head. And you see how that braid is starting to fill out as I add these dark accents. And my braid doesn't copy exactly what's in front of me, but I've made an effort to understand the basic pattern of the braid, and so I think my drawing gives a pretty good sense of there being a braid, even if it doesn't copy the exact every detail of the braid that's in front of me. Oh, thank you. Once you realize that you don't really need to copy everything exactly to make it look okay, you have a lot more fun drawing.
Whoa, why did my braid eat? Oh my God.
Okay, now we're going to look for dark accents in the rest of the hair. And notice that they all follow below these highlights. So here I'm going to throw in, I'm trying to follow the direction the hair actually grows now. And again, I'm looking for a pattern. Do I have exact right number of highlights? No, and I really don't care. I just have a sense of where my highlights are and how these dark forms relate to them. So we're going to follow these swirly forms. I mean, we could work on this for hours and not do this hair justice, but we're trying to just give a general impression. And along the top, we were trying to show these contours, show that it's not completely smooth across the top. And your drawing will look a lot more natural also if you just, most artists will throw in a few little flyaway hairs like you don't want it to look like a toupee, and these little flyaways will really make a difference for that. Here's another big dark form. And that's a very kind of simplified idea of the hair that we're seeing here. But it kind of does the job. Okay. If you're not done with the hair, don't worry. You can come back to it. But sometimes it's really not a bad idea to establish a lot of these big darks in the hair before we shade the darks in the face, because normally when you start putting shadows on the face, they look way too dark, because if those are the first darks that you introduce into the drawing, you're going to read them incorrectly and they're going to seem much darker than they need to be. But now we're basically keying our halftones on the face against these darks that are already in the hair. So it's going to be a little easier. So we're going to erase all our construction lines in the face, because you can't erase them after you shade. And we're going to shadow map. There's a little shadow behind the ear. Do your shadow map very, very lightly, please, because you don't want to, if you do it light enough, you don't even have to erase it. So here's the shadow map under the jaw. It's just like shadow mapping a sphere. You see the curve on the chin there? Here's the shadow, little cast shadow under the nose and a shadow along the tip of the nose. A little shadow under the brow, very small piece there. And I'm going to say under the cheekbone, there's just a little hint of shadow right there. That might be a halftone, but we'll call it a shadow. If you don't remember the difference, halftones are the slightly slightly darker areas inside the lights. The shadows are out of the light. So without thinking too much about the map, we're going to just do a first shading. Again, this is lefty shading, so go the other way if you're righty. And this is the one time where you really don't think about what you're doing. Just trust the decisions that you made. And it's like a coloring book. You're just putting the shadows where you indicated that they need to be. And then you step back and look at the effect you're getting. Okay. Now my final touches are going to involve the halftones. So there's a little halftone at the top of the ala, little halftone under the brow ridge. I should have, this is all in shadow. The middle part of the ear is in shadow. The white of the eye is a halftone. It's not the brightest part of the drawing, contrary to what most of you tend to believe. Little halftone under the eye socket and along the side of the forehead. And the last step in the drawing before we do any necessary revisions is the darkest darks. So this is the time in the drawing where you can press as hard as you want. So we're doing the darkest darks now. We've got a real black at the back of the iris. That's the pupil. That's the darkest part of the face in most cases. And you see how that really brought it to life? Just throwing that little dark back there. We go pretty dark right behind the ear. So I'm going to go a little darker back here. And there's a lovely reflected light under the jaw. You see that? And just like a sphere, the way we get that is not by erasing anything, but by darkening above it through the rounded core shadow of the jawline. You see that? So this is where your shading technique from practicing with spheres and cylinders with these curved shading lines comes into play. And a little dark accent here. Little halftone along just above the collar. I'm going to clean up this contour, turn it into a simpler line.
Put it in my cubby afterwards. Bye, Mr. Allen. Thank you.
So we're now going to take a look at some of the drawings by my students here. Again, this is an intro to drawing class. So the model is going to look at this video years from now and be amused by these drawings. It's quite a strong group of drawings. Yeah, I think that's Nick's drawing. And that's, ooh. 10 out of 10? All right.
That was pretty good, honestly. Oh, that's fine.
And finally, what would you give this one?
Like a 3. What's your rate, Mom?
Okay.
Oh, guess what? Who said it? That was mine.
Okay, thanks for watching, everybody.